Alright everybody, here's our Mewtwo Y tier list. We have Mewtwo Y in our God tier, Mewtwo X is in our Demigod tier, and now the rest of our Pokemon, let me find them right here. Oh, yeah, just gotta keep scrolling, I guess. Gotta keep going. S tier, A tier. Oh, here they all are. Here they all are in our D tier, and there you go. There's your tier list. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I'll see you all next time. I kid, but it certainly does feel like that. It's Monday. On Mondays, we do tier lists, and on Wednesdays, we wear pink.
So I told the sales lady, I'll take one in each color, and she said, are you getting a divorce? And I said, how'd you guess?
That's really funny, Mom.
Today, I'm doing our Mewtwo Y release tier list, and I pray and hope that this is the shortest lived tier list on my channel and that the meta will change very, very soon. Let's just start right off the bat with the fact that Mewtwo Y is absolutely insane. It is in our God tier without question, and Mewtwo X actually has a very, very interesting situation going on with it right now. It is in our Demigod tier. Don't get it twisted, and I know you like to get it twisted out there, so nice try getting it twisted. I'm not going to allow it. Don't get it twisted. Mewtwo X is absolutely unbelievably broken S-tier Pokemon. It's just that Mewtwo Y is even easier to do well with. I know, I'm as shocked as you are, but Mewtwo X's win rate has plummeted since Mewtwo Y came out because Mewtwo Y can be at range and still do insane damage, still mega at range, and it also has an ability to charge its mega gauge while out of combat, giving Mewtwo Y a big advantage. And because you can only have one Mewtwo on a team, you'll see Mewtwo X and Y go against each other. If the X is not very good, it will not be able to catch Mewtwo Y, and Mewtwo Y wins a lot of those encounters, giving Mewtwo Y an absurd win rate, and Mewtwo X somehow sub 50%. It's at like 47%. These Pokemon, incredibly busted, game-changing Pokemon, meta-changing Pokemon, and honestly, the worst, kind of. They're kind of the worst, but here we are, this is the meta, and I'm going to rank every other Pokemon in the game, knowing that these two things exist. Let's go through our tiers for this week. We have our God tier that Mewtwo Y is sitting in, our Demigod tier that Mewtwo X is sitting in, our S tier, A+, A, our B tier. Still got the B tier, and even with Mewtwo Y, I'm more upset about the B tier. Come on! We got our C tier, we have our D tier, our Decidueye Memorial tier, our S tier are Pokemon that are definitely overtuned and they're really, really powerful inside the game. Our A+ and A, very strong. I like to have a little delineation there because I think some Pokemon are very, very close to being S. There are just things that hold them back, and other ones are just extremely solid, strong picks. That's our A tier. Our B tier are Pokemon that are fine. Our C tier are not so fine, and our D tier really needs some love. I'm going to start with all-rounders this week and line them up into our tier list here. Let's start with someone who actually got a buff and I feel like is doing pretty well right now. That's Tyranitar. I actually like Tyranitar's positioning in the game for the first time in a little while. They're not massive buffs, even though it is the Battle Pass Pokemon that is coming out very, very soon. Oftentimes, the Battle Pass Pokemon get some buffs for its release, and to be fair, Tyranitar absolutely needed them. This is a Pokemon that has not been having a great time in our meta for a while. I don't think it's in the A+ or S tier or anything like that. I think it's become a much more solid pick with a lower Unite move timer and some increased HP. It might even still need a little love to be a stronger Pokemon here, but every time I've played Tyranitar since the buffs, I've actually been pleasantly surprised with T-Tar, which is pretty cool because for a long time, as I'm sure many of you know, this Pokemon has not been crushing it. It still has to deal with the fact that it needs a ton of experience to get online. It's one of the most experience-hungry Pokemon in the game. For that reason, I think it could probably still use just a little buff, a little touch of the buff. I feel like the design behind T-Tar is really cool, bad early, great late. It's just tough when you look at T-Tar compared to Pokemon like Mewtwo X, who is obviously a crazy all-rounder here. Mewtwo Y is an attacker, but Mewtwo X being a crazy all-rounder that only needs level 5 to get going. So that is a little frustrating right here. But T-Tar doing a lot better. Sword, I think, is good-ish. I kind of like Sword. I think I like it more than the B tier, but I don't have a B+ tier, thank God, this week. I think Aegislash does decently well into certain matchups. I don't think Aegislash really likes Mewtwo X or Y too much. Y just gets to play at extreme range against it, and X, the tough thing about any brawling style Pokemon, even a Pokemon with shield like a Pokemon with shields like Aegislash using Wide Guard or Iron Head, you still have to deal with a Pokemon that when you're next to it for too long, you're in a little bit of trouble. It's not too far away from T-Tar, I would say, and it definitely takes a lot more skill, I feel like, than T-Tar to really pull off, even though Tyranitar actually isn't the easiest Pokemon to play either. I think Sword is solid and fine. Could maybe use a little more love if you wanted to compete with some of these top tier choices. It also isn't that amazing early, I feel like. Let's see, our next all-rounder, we could talk about Zacian. I think Zacian is either A+ or S. I still don't think it really hangs out in the S tier for me as much, but it's tough because I'm just comparing it to sort of the more broken things inside the game. If there was an S- tier, which thank God there isn't, I might put Zacian into it. It doesn't feel as broken as some of the other S tier Pokemon that we're going to talk about a little later in this tier list, but you know what? Nothing feels that broken right now in Pokemon Unite except for Mewtwo Y and Mewtwo X. Mewtwo Y, because I said so. I'll put it into our S tier because it's still has a consistently high win rate. It still has crazy good burst damage. It's a strong Pokemon without question. I feel like after its nerfs, though, it's kind of come back down to at least a level of reality that we can all hang out in. We have Machamp. I think Machamp is doing pretty good inside the meta. I think Machamp always does pretty good, and I would also put it here into our A tier. Nothing really to write home about as far as like being the best Pokemon, but having a solid secure early, pretty strong damage. It's actually able to delete some Pokemon it can jump in on and get a nice big combo. Again, not amazing, but at the same time, really, really solid choice for a lot of teams. And its early game is very strong. Because its early game is quite strong, I think Machamp does pretty well inside Unite, and it has a game-changing Unite move, which is always really, really amazing. Garchomp is the next Pokemon on our list here, and I actually think Garchomp is probably here in the A+ tier. The only problem with Garchomp is it just runs into these overpowered Pokemon. So I just need to stop down for a second to say it's the joke I made earlier, it really does feel like that. So when I'm putting Garchomp into the A+ tier, just know that there is quite a chasm between our A+ tier and our God tier right here. But I do think Garchomp's been doing great for a while, and then the recent buffs to Garchomp are really, really nice. I think Garchomp's actually in an amazing position. If Mewtwo X and Y were not where they are, I think Garchomp would shine a lot better. But I still think Garchomp is doing pretty well. We have Lucario, who got some buffs a little while back, and I think Lucario is doing pretty good as well. I'd put it up into our A tier here. The thing is, Lucario is not the Lucario it used to be at all, but the buff to its Unite move, the buff to extreme speed, things like that have made Lucario just a little more usable inside of this meta. We have Scizor. I don't love Scizor. I don't hate Scizor. I feel like Scizor is just always kind of fine. I think a lot of people's issue with Scizor is that they want to play this Pokemon in a position where it needs tons of experience, but it actually doesn't. Once Scizor hits level 5, it's powerful, and I think, and even in lane, its secure is really good. So I think a lot of people try to play this in the central area, and they don't need to. There are tons of other Pokemon that could use that XP, and if you're good with Scizor and you're able to stay in combat, even around things like Mewtwo's and Garchomps and things like that, you can actually do pretty well if you're able to sort of juggle your bullet punch and keep your damage up so that you can continue to restore HP. The only problem is this thing is just really not good into some of the ranged Pokemon and some of the special attack damage Pokemon like Mewtwo Y that we have inside the game right now. Charizard doing fine, and I could say C for Charizard, I honestly could, but it's actually not that bad. It's just so... It just feels so basic at this point compared to some of these other Pokemon. I was playing Char the other day. It was fine. I had some solid games on it. I think it's probably slept on a little bit, but when you compare it to some of these other Pokemon and when you notice the fact that it really hasn't gotten love in a long time, I actually think C is maybe a fair place to put this Pokemon, even though it's maybe a little better than C tier would have you think. It's also a Pokemon that feels like it's been neglected a bit. And then it had a nerf a while back that was just confusing. So I think Char's fine. One of the biggest issues I have with Char right now is I feel like when you unite with Char, you're no longer safe. You used to be safe when you united with Char. It was a moment for you to just Trogdor, burn everything to the ground. And now it actually feels like you're not so safe when you use it. I think they could probably do a few things to Char to really give it some quality of life. We've got Scyther here. Scyther performs more like a speedster, but it is in our all-rounder category here, given that it is an all-rounder. But Scyther is essentially a speedster, and I think as speedsters go, it's fine. It does some decent damage. There are some high-level players that really like Scyther. However, I think there are multiple speedsters inside the game that just do its job, but better. So if you like Scyther, might I introduce you to Zoroark or something like that? But Scyther's decent. It has really strong single target damage, and it's kind of a delete button for a few of the squishier Pokemon in the game. In fact, I think depending on what you're dealing with on the enemy team, if they have Mewtwo Y, Scyther actually wouldn't be too bad of a choice as a delete button because you just have this crazy strong Unite move into a combo. Pretty good. But in general, Scissor, Scyther, I think are both, Dragonite, I would say, is a little better than the pack right here, but not too much. I might put it B. I might put it low A. Dragonite's fine. Outrage is fine. Hyper Beam is fine. Dragonite's fine. You know what? I can't put it any higher. It's fine. It's fine. That's about as high as I can put this Pokemon. What else is there to say about Dragonite? It just doesn't really set the world on fire in this meta. It really doesn't. And that is something that you have to recognize. When we talk about a tier list, you're not ranking them against nothing. You're ranking them against what they are often playing against. And I don't think Dragonite does particularly well into sort of the common meta that we're seeing. Urshifu, on the other hand, I think is still very, very good. I would put our Water Bear up into our S tier, and I'd put our Dark Beer, we got our Dark Beer in our A tier. I think I would put the Dark Bear in the A tier, A plus tier right here. I think these are still really solid. I think the Wicked Blow build just doesn't get enough love anymore, but it's still a really, really solid build. Its Unite move has incredible targeted damage too. I just think it's actually a little trickier to play after they nerfed it and after they brought in some really nutty Pokemon. And then Water Bear has one of the best level 5s inside the game. So the Rapid Strike style Urshifu level 5 is unbelievably good. It's one of the best inside the entire game. Just an absolute bully in most of your matches right here. So I think that Pokemon is still very, very solid. Azumarill is also fine. Azumarill like B tier fine. I kind of like it more than most of the B tier right here, I gotta say. I don't think it's A. I think one of the big problems with Azumarill is it doesn't seem to have sort of the deletion button from its Unite move anymore. That got changed a while back at this point. It's still doing okay. I think Aqua Tail is still the build for it here. Some people like to play Whirlpool. Some people like play Rough. But you know what? Some people eat bugs. So I don't know what to tell you with that. I think this Pokemon's doing okay. And it would look a lot better if it wasn't for some of the higher end stuff on our tier list. Zarina. What is there to say? Zarina's the worst. It's the worst, man. If you're great with Zarina, you're still useful, but come on. Zarina is so tragic in Pokemon Unite. It's like, I don't know if anything has fallen harder. By the way, this is a great point. In the comments, and I'm sure there's a few things I'm forgetting, please let me know if you can think of something that fell off harder than Zarina, because I don't know if anything in the game has fallen off harder than this Pokemon. It truly is rough. It needs some buffs to be competitive. I know that they have to be careful with it because it used to be S tier for sure. It was broken, especially in the hands of really, really talented players. But come on, what has happened to this Pokemon? And finally, let's talk about Buzzwole here. I think Buzzwole is sick. I think Buzzwole is one of the best all-rounders in the game. Definitely an A+ tier all-rounder here. And to be fair, I don't have these exactly sorted when they're inside their tiers. I just kind of put them into that tier. If you like Buzzwole better than Garchomp, I can't really argue with you here. If you like Urshifu better than Zacian, I can't really argue with you here. They're both very, very good Pokemon. But I think Buzzwole is really strong. Its combo, you know, with superpower is amazing. Its level 5 is great. Its lane presence is extremely good. Its last hitting is brutal. This Pokemon is so good. However, it is a high skill ceiling Pokemon, which I really like. This is like the kind of Pokemon that you have to be very good with to do well with. But if you are, yeah, you're feeling pretty dang good with Buzzy Boy. Buzzwole is incredible. And now that we've done all-rounders like Mewtwo X, let's move on over to attackers like Mewtwo Y. Attackers are an interesting category because they're actually very varied. They're very varied. Ding, and that's how varied they are. Attackers are quite varied. So you have ranged attackers like Cinderace and Greninja, and then you also have sort of the ranged special attackers like Gardevoir and things like that. Then you have sort of the weird attackers like Pikachu, Venusaur, Sylveon that don't exactly fit into a category. It's a really interesting sort of area of Pokemon. It's also the largest part of our roster, I think, for that reason, because a lot of Pokemon fit into this in some really interesting ways. So let's talk about Pokemon that are attack damage carries, essentially like Mewtwo, even though Mewtwo Y is a special attack damage sort of auto attacker carry, like Cinderace, Greninja, things like that. So while I talk about this group, I've just set them all here into our B tier while we can quickly break them down. Cinderace, Greninja, Duraludon, Decidueye, and Dragapult. All of these Pokemon are of a similar flavor, but they all do something a little different. And unfortunately for all of these Pokemon, in most ways, they are all sort of just beat out by Mewtwo Y, who does all of their job but better. I mean, without question. Everyone has a different thing that Mewtwo Y cannot do, but Mewtwo Y can press the A button better than any of these Pokemon without question. Cinderace and Greninja and Dragapult, I would say, are hurt the hardest by this because their roles feel very, very, very similar, and at the same time, they are just not as good. If you were comparing them to Mewtwo Y, you would put all of these Pokemon down into our D tier, but that wouldn't be reasonable just to say, well, play Mewtwo Y, even though that's what people are doing. But all of these Pokemon just really don't compare to it. Also, Mewtwo Y is special attack, which means it can use a Slick Spoon. Slick Spoon is kind of a broken item, so it's a whole thing, yeah. If I were to rate these Pokemon, I would keep Cinderace and Greninja, if I were to rate them, as if I'm not doing a tier list. If I were to do a tier list right now, Cinderace and Greninja, I think, would probably stay in our B tier right here, probably with Dragapult. Dragapult actually has been doing pretty well for a long time. I think one of the biggest reasons Dragapult has been doing okay, even though it doesn't have a very high pick rate, is because its Unite move is really solid at picking up KOs and last hitting objectives and things like that. But right now it just feels like all three of these Pokemon are woefully inadequate. Draga. I was gonna call him Dragapult again. Duraludon, on the other hand, I think is a little better than the pack. It always has a little better win rate. It always just feels like it does a little better than some of these Pokemon, and the big reason for that is Dragon Pulse and its ability to secure things. Its Unite move is also pretty dang good, and its attack stat is unbelievable. I would say it beats out the rest of our auto attackers, except for Decidueye, who actually, out of this pack, might be in the best position. Here's the thing. It's awful being Decidueye and having Pokemon jump in on you and doing crazy amounts of damage. But with Mewtwo Y, you're actually playing at extreme range and you actually get a lot of value out of your Spirit Shackle. I have not hated Decidueye in this meta. Now, if you're playing Razor Leaf Decidueye, thoughts and prayers, cause it's over for you, buddy. But Decidueye with Spirit Shackle actually, I think, performs better than really any of these auto attackers inside this meta. That being said, as soon as someone wants to walk on over to you and KO you, they will happily do that because you are Decidueye. Let's start talking about some of our mages essentially here in a second. Before we do that, I'll bring in Inteleon, who's just kind of a weird sort of auto attacker, sort of mage, sort of lots of different things, and sort of really, really good. If it wasn't for Pokemon like X and Y, we would be talking about how amazing things like Inteleon are. Inteleon's great and actually plays pretty well into Mewtwo X and Y because you can play at really amazing range with it, whether you're using Snipe Shot, don't do that, or Liquidation. I think both of these builds actually work pretty well into a lot of what's going on in the meta. It does feel a little similar to Decidueye at times where you can just jump in on it and do some crazy damage. However, it has great mobility with both Fell Stinger and Acrobatics. I think Inteleon is in a really, really solid spot. You could maybe argue that it's a little closer to A+ because you can counter this Pokemon and some of the tankier stuff in the game really can eat a lot of its moves. But its early game secure is unbelievable, which is why you want to play it in Path. And Inteleon, for that reason that it's strong early and it can outrange a lot of what's going on in the meta, I think it sits into our S tier right here. And now let's talk about our mages, who are all pretty dang good inside of Pokemon Unite. We have Gardevoir, who I think is a solid A tier Pokemon. It doesn't really get too much higher out of that because it doesn't have incredible mobility, but its damage is really solid. Its Unite move is really, really powerful. It actually feels like Gardevoir's thing is, it doesn't feel like it takes as much skill as some characters in the game, but I actually think knowing how to position yourself with Gardevoir and where to be inside fights is extremely important. And if you know that, I think you're doing pretty well with Guardy right here. Solid Pokemon. Espeon, same thing. I think people are actually sleeping on how good Psyshock still is in the game, and Stored Power is a really solid, sure hit move that does a lot of damage to your opponents. It also has a good Unite move. It evolves at 8. It gets its Unite at 8, which is really powerful because you can show up to one of the early fights with a Unite move. It evolves at 4. Its last hitting is very, very good early. I think Espeon is still in a really solid place, even though it's kind of been toned back from when it was like one of the most oppressive things in the game. Delphox is a weird one. This is more for anything outside of coordinated gameplay. Coordinated gameplay, I don't like Delphox. I honestly don't think it's very good in 5 stacks. Some people like to run it. I think Delphox is always a bad choice in 5 stacks. I think there are way better choices. However, outside of 5 stacking in Unite, I think Delphox is extremely good. And the biggest reason is crazy low Unite move cooldown and incredible mobility. And those are some important things that you need inside of a match of Pokemon Unite, especially when you're not coordinated with your allies and it's hard to know if someone's going to block for you or things like that. Having the ability to move around the battlefield so well is just so powerful. I think Delphox is doing pretty well right here. That's why it's in our A+ tier. It doesn't do as much as it used to, which keeps it out of our S tier for me. And I think people have just kind of become wise to how this Pokemon plays, and they don't fight in its Unite move as much anymore and things like that. So it moves it a little bit out of S, but I think Delphox is still really strong. Alola Ninetales, for me, this is either A+ or S tier. I'm not kidding. Especially, here's the thing, especially playing against this thing coordinated, I think it's unbelievably good. Unbelievably good in 5 stacks. One of the best Pokemon. And you know what? I actually am putting it into our S tier. Here's the thing about Alola Ninetales, and this is for Blizzard Avalanche. Blizzard Avalanche is such a powerful counter to any Pokemon who wants to get near your team. Hitting them with the Blizzard with the push into a wall or into your Avalanche, the self-made wall that you can do. Hey, let me tell you, all right? Some people out there got handed walls by their parents. I'm a self-made wall out here. So this Pokemon is just so incredibly good right now. And it's so incredibly good against anything that wants to get close and deal damage to your team. Blizzard into a wall, into an Avalanche, like I was saying before. You've got the push. You've got essentially a stun, a freeze. The Unite move is so powerful. I love Alolan Ninetales right now. Again, as long as we are talking about Blizzard Avalanche, I think Dazzling Gleam Aurora Veil is not it at all. Not at all right now. And it's just because of how good Blizzard Avalanche is currently. Chandelure. Chandelure is either the top of A or, you know, kind of lower into the A+ tier. I think Chandelure is still doing really well in the meta. This Pokemon also requires incredibly strong positioning from your team. Its Unite move isn't as good as Gardevoir, but its level 5 is insane. Like, its level 5 is crazy good. Overheat at level 5 is amazing. Imprison is still really, really good. I think this Pokemon's still doing really well. Its biggest problems are the fact that, you know, it needs to evolve multiple times, and it's not really good until level 5. I think that's the issues that you have with Chandelure. Outside of that, I actually think Shandy is just so incredibly strong. One of my favorite Pokemon to play. It's kind of like one of those tricky when I'm in a little bit of a rut because I'm running into too many Mewtwo Ys. Like, I could just play a little Chandelure, throw my fire from a million miles away, and pick up some big KOs. Let's see. Mew. Mew is a weird one. I never know where to put Mew. The thing about Mew is, if you're great with Mew, it's great. And if you're not great with Mew, now it's fine. I kind of think it's S. It's just so incredibly useful. But then I also could be swayed into thinking it's A+ as well. It's definitely toned down from where it used to be. But at the same time, your ability to switch moves on the fly, your ability to play at extreme range, your slipperiness, your Unite move, I think Mew is just so good, especially in the hands of the right player. In the hands of the right player, this thing is top of S tier. The problem is Mew is actually not as easy to play as it used to be because its damage has been toned down basically on every single thing inside of its kit. Although I do still think Mew is really strong. And if I had to rank it against these other two, I would definitely put it above it. It's either A+ or S. It's so good. Mew is so good. Cram? I think Cram is also still doing really well inside the game. I was going to put it into our A tier. I've played with it a few times recently, and even into things like X and Y, I think Cram is really solid. Dive Cram specifically, because you just have so much... You have so much ability. We'll see how well I get through this sentence, everybody. You have so much ability to maneuver around the battle. I hate how this is going. To maneuver around the battlefield with dive and air slash, and being able to play at range like that, and being able to kite, you know, very, very strong opponents, I think is really good. And Cram is still very solid at this with a powerful Unite move. I think Cramorant is probably one of the more slept on Pokemon inside the game. And maybe just because people don't love playing it, but it's still really, really great. Venusaur, another A+ for me. Venusaur doesn't make it into my S tier, even though I think in coordinated play, it's clearly been shown to be one of the more powerful Pokemon inside the game. It can still be countered decently well in any other form of play because you just don't have the same kind of support from your team. But whether you're playing Beamosaur or you're playing Giga Drain, Petal Dance, Venusaur, both have a lot of value inside the game. Beamosaur being able to outrange X and Y is also extremely important. It almost makes... It's really close to the S tier for me. It's really, really close. I think Beamosaur is still really strong. And I think Petal Dance Giga Drain actually outbrawls a lot of top Pokemon in the game. I just can't... I can't come to put it into our S tier because it doesn't feel broken to me. It just feels really solid. S tier feels kind of... These things, there's something about them that feel kind of broken to me. So I'm going to keep it into our A tier. And again, our A+. And if I had to, I'd probably put it above some of the rest of these Pokemon here. And I have to, because I said if I have to. Glaceon, still doing really well. Maybe closer to our A tier right now. I think the nerfs to Glaceon were warranted, needed. Glaceon's still really powerful. You know, it's got Icicle Spear, which is a sure hit. It's got Icy Wind, which is a sure hit, essentially. Of course, they can be, like, Icicle Spear can be, you know, intercepted and blocked. But you get what I mean. Like, you lock onto a target, and they're going to get hit by these moves, essentially, which is really, really good. Like all the other EVs, evolving at 8, very powerful. Evolving. Unite moving at 8, evolving at 4. Very, very powerful. And I think Glaceon's still doing really well inside the meta. It's probably just not as interesting of a pick when you compare it to some of the top choices inside the game right now. Pikachu is fine. It's fine. It's not bad. It's fine. But to compare with some of the other Pokemon, I'm putting it down here in our C tier because while it's fine, it still could use something. I think it needs a buff or something like that. It feels like a reasonable support attacker, but you could probably do... You could give it... even more HP. I know that's like weird to think of for a Pikachu, but if we're gonna play it as a support, maybe it can survive a little longer inside of combat or something like that. I don't know. It would just be interesting for them to do something with Pikachu, because I feel like it's been a long time since we've seen some nice buffs for Pikachu. And Sylvie, I think, is pretty good. I think Sylvie's A. Maybe it's B. It's right in here. All the EVs are good. The thing about Sylveon is it doesn't have the kind of damage output and the kind of range that Espeon and Glaceon have, but it's actually like one of the most tanky attackers inside the game. It's really disruptive. So I like Sylveon inside the meta right now. I don't absolutely love it, but I do think it's a pretty solid choice. And those are our attackers inside Pokemon Unite. Let's do our defenders next. Defenders are an interesting group because they're all so friggin' good. Like, defenders are so good in Unite right now. Lapras, Umbreon. I'm just gonna pop these two right up into our S tier right away. These things are nuts, man. I would put Slowbro up here as well, even though Slowbro's kind of fallen out of favor a little bit because of these two. I don't think there's any reason to think that this is not one of the best Pokemon inside the game. Lapras, Umbreon, Slowbro, all amazing. Lapras and Umbreon have, you know, Slowbro does as well. They're all super tanky. They all do pretty dang good damage. They all have extremely impactful Unite moves, and then they all have ways to recover HP. They're just so good. They're all so good. And having a team without one of the premier defenders on your team is actually pretty rough. Another defender that I want to talk about that I think is almost in this group, if not in this group, is Trevenant. Trevenant's so good. I played a tournament last week or something like that. I was playing a lot of Trevenant myself as sort of the top path role, and it's just so solid. Its early secure is amazing. Woodhammer is disgusting. I love this Pokemon right now. I think my personal preference for it is maybe higher than A+, but I'm talking, the only thing I think that keeps it out of the S tier for me is its Unite move. I don't think is as good as any of the Unite moves in the S tier. However, it's really, really strong. Its early game's amazing. It has to evolve at 5, which hurts it a little bit too. Lapras never needing to evolve, and then Umbreon and Slowbro both evolving at 4. But still, Trev is killing it right now. Trev is also really, really good. Another one that I was sleeping on a little bit, I played a ton in this tournament, was Blastoise. Blastoise is crushing it. Both builds are crushing it. It's so strong. I underestimated this a little bit until I started picking it up again recently, and Blastoise is still doing very, very well. I think its biggest issue is not having the kind of self-sustain that the other defenders have. However, outside of that, I think Blastoise is really, really powerful. Its only other issue is it needs experience. I beg you, if you are a Blastoise player, please find your XP. Don't sit at Wartortle for that long. Don't sit at Squirtle for that long. You need to last hit a wild Pokemon. Somewhere you need to evolve. It's probably its biggest issue. It's the thing that holds it back the most, is that players just don't get experience for it. Goodra, I think, is also doing really, really well. Goodra's so strong. For the longest time, Goodra, I think, was pretty mid, but right now, the amount of sustain that you get with this Pokemon, how often you can Unite move with it, how strong its early game is also really impressive. One of the better sort of brawly all-rounders in the game, and that those feel like Pokemon kind of like Trev a little bit, Lapras a little bit. I mean, I said all-rounders. All of the defenders are very, like, brawl-heavy at certain points, but Goodra just really feels like it's up in the mix, and if you land your Dragon Pulses, you seriously live forever with this Pokemon. Doing really, really well right now. Mamo, doing pretty good. I'd put it into our A tier right here. The thing about Mamo is it just doesn't have the kind of self-sustain that the others do, but it's a solid defender, and you can get some really, really good stuff done with this Pokemon. Also, incredible early game. Krusty boy. Crustle got buffs, and Crustle is doing so well. I might be too nice to Crustle right here, but I think Crustle's maybe up into our A+ tier, honestly. Its buffs are great. Its buff to its passive, really, really good. And its Unite move has always been one of the more slept on Unite moves inside the game, but now people are seeing how powerful this Unite is. So Crustle, for the longest time, has been down in our Decidueye Memorial tier. It just is the kind of Pokemon that has not gotten love for ever. And they finally like turned their eyes towards Crustle a little bit and said, hey, why does this Pokemon have one of the lowest pick rates? Why does this Pokemon never have a good win rate? And they actually fixed this thing, and I think it's doing really well. Greedent's fine. Greedent's weird and fine and weird and fine and weird. And I'm gonna put it into our A tier, but it's so specific and so weird that it's like, I don't know what to say about this Pokemon, because as I've mentioned many times, it kind of sits in this weird harasser role. I feel like if you have Greedent, you probably still need another defender on your team. It's just one of the weirdest Pokemon inside the game, but for its role, it actually does a pretty good job. And then we have Snorlax, who's also really solid. I can't really put any of our defenders lower than this because they're all great at their job. They actually do their job really, really well. And now that Crustle has gotten buffs and Goodra's gotten multiple buffs, bringing it sort of out of this mid-range, I don't think there's any defender in the game that I would be unhappy to have on my team. There are some I'd like more, like Umbreon, Lapras, Slowbro, and some I'd like maybe less. Probably Greedent being it, because you have to be very, very good with Greedent to get the value out of it that you can with other defenders. However, all the defenders crushing it right now. You guys are crushing it. Great job, everybody. Great job, defenders. You're killing it. Next, let's talk about our supporters. Another category of Pokemon that are just crushing it inside of Pokemon Unite. I'm going to start with Wigglytuff, because Wigglytuff is kind of a defender inside the game. It really isn't a supporter. It just kind of does everything a defender does, which is fine. I think Wiggly is good. Maybe a little better than B. I'm putting it B because if you run into Umbreon, Wiggly's life is a nightmare. And it feels like it probably could use some sort of self-sustain if it wants to keep up with other defenders, or it could use some more displacement. So Sing could activate faster to put Pokemon to sleep. Rollout's such a hard move to balance. I don't know. Rollout could knock up longer. You know, it could send them in the air longer or something like that. Wiggly is just weird because it's essentially a defender. It's in the supporter category, and all the defenders are basically better than it. So I like Wiggly too, but yeah, that's where Wiggly is. Wiggly's fine. Our next supporter that I think needs some actual love I'm going to talk about, and is getting some, is Sableye. Sableye is not terrible, but compared to other supporters, it's really rough, and it's right there with Greedent in our like harasser role. So its whole job is disrupting the enemy team, and since they kind of lowered its health and stuff like that, it just feels like sometimes it's too easy to counter this Pokemon outside of competitive play. And even then, I think like a lot of people are not going to run this. It's just a really hard Pokemon to slot into your team in the place that it's at right now. I'm not saying it's Decidueye Memorial tier bad, but as a supporter, it's probably one of our lowest on the list. And it's right there with Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is maybe a little better than Sableye, maybe. The problem with Mime, too, is that it was just broken, and then they finally kind of fixed it. And ever since then, I think everyone's been happy to leave that part of the game behind. But we have noticed that Mr. Mime's been struggling. Not unplayable, but definitely struggling inside the game for a long time. Interestingly enough, both Mime and Sableye do have some buffs coming. They're minor, and we could see more. We just know what's being tested on the PTS right now. So there's like a buff to Confusion for Mr. Mime, and I think Sableye has a knockoff buff that's increasing some stun duration. So possibly bringing these two just a little more in line with the rest of the roster here. And now, of course, it's time to talk about these other insanely good supporters that are all truly, like, they're all crazy good. I don't even know. It's so hard. Like, okay, I'm going to start setting them here in our S tier, and I'm going to decide who is not in the S tier, which is really hard to do because they're all truly some of the most impactful Pokemon inside the game. Comfey, I have to leave in our S tier. It's an enabler, and it enables some really bad behavior, especially with things like Mewtwo X and Y. And then Blissey is probably the worst culprit of all. Blissey can just... I'm trying to keep them like with their roles, you know, but Blissey could essentially be at the top of our S tier. The thing is, Helping Hand Safeguard Blissey is essentially the Comfey Zacian combo. The Helping Hand Safeguard with Mewtwo Y is stupid. They need to do something about it. And Blissey's win rate's probably like just as high as Mewtwo Y's because it's essentially that same sort of cringe combo where you find something that's so broken and you just pair it together all the time, and it's so broken. Comfey, again, enabler, so broken. Hoopa is insane. Hoopa's utility is insane. It's probably not as useful as some of the other supporters right here outside of competitive play, but in general, what Hoopa can do is really just like singular. There are very few Pokemon that could, very few isn't even right. There are no Pokemon that have sort of the macro capabilities that Hoopa has, as well as a Unite move that is just so incredibly powerful, while also being able to reposition and bring your team in. I can't move it out of the S tier, even though if you're playing solo and things like that, you're not going to find that this is an S tier solo Pokemon choice. However, just in the game, it's so dang good. It's incredible. Eldegoss is just like the Elder God and has been for a long time now. It's one of the best early Pokemon in the game, maybe the best like level 5 Pokemon in the game. It's right up there with some of the top tier choices. It's brutal. It counters any stacking Pokemon. It's so good. It does so much damage. It heals so well. Its Unite move is awesome. Like, LD is killing it. I guess the only one that I'll move out is Clefable. And even that, I'm not really... I don't know. I think Clefable's awesome. If I had to move one or two, I'd move Hoopa maybe in solo. Like if it was solo, duo, trio, even duo, trio. I'd probably move Hoopa here. Man, that might not even be super fair. I mean, this is an A+ tier though. I might move Hoopa here and Clefable here. However, Clefable is so good. On a tankier team, Clefable, I feel like outpaces things like Blissey, but on a Mewtwo Y team, Blissey is kind of insane. However, all of these supporters are top tier choices inside the game. If you look at one team and one team has a great defender and great supporter and the other team just has like a lot of all-rounders and attackers, the all-rounders and attackers, I would say, have a very high likelihood of losing that match because the utility you get from great support and great defenders is unparalleled and unmatched only until you consider things like Mewtwo. Let's move into our Speedsters now. The last release we had for a Speedster was Leafeon, I believe. And Speedsters have been up and down inside our meta for a long, long time. There are some of them that I think are still doing pretty dang well. And we do have a Speedster on the horizon, obviously. We have Meowscarada on the horizon. For all-rounders, we have two on the horizon, Blaziken and Mimikyu, both of which are so freaking cool. I've got videos of those on my channel if you want to check them out. Let's talk about our Speedsters here. Zeraora. Zeraora had like 2 days of being so freaking meta. Like right before Mewtwo X came out, Zeraora had like 2 days of being so dang good. And then Mewtwo X came out, and then Mewtwo Y came out. And the problem with Zeraora is playing into Mewtwo X and Y, it's not that good. It feels like it really struggles. It really does. However, after it got those buffs and right before Mewtwo, it was actually doing pretty well. I'm going to put Zera actually into our A tier probably. I think that's a fair place to put it. The only problem is I don't know. It's either A or B. The thing is, it runs into the meta. The meta. And running into the meta, it's not ideal, right? That's the problem. But it's so much better than it was previously. I don't know. I'll think about it. It's in here somewhere. It's in here somewhere. Ah, Zera. I feel so bad for Zeraora because it was right there. It was like so good. Oh, the buffs were so nice for this Pokemon. Okay, Gengar. No. I don't like Gengar. I don't like Gengar in this meta. I don't think Gengar is very good. Maybe it's C. Maybe. I do not think Gengar is crushing it right now. There are too many tanky Pokemon that eat its entire combo, and then you have the Mewtwo's, which just absolutely dumpster it. Another Pokemon that I feel like is just like, blech, is Absol. I really like Absol. I like its playstyle. It feels like more complicated and more powerful playstyles have just come out, and it just makes Absol not very good. The thing about Speedsters always is you buff Gengar a little bit or you buff Absol a little bit and all of a sudden these are top tier choices once again because Speedsters are just so incredibly difficult to balance, but I don't like either of them in this meta. I don't think either of them are doing very well. Dodrio I think is solid. I'd put it probably in our A or A+. The thing about Dodrio is Mewtwo X and Y counter this thing so hard. It's still good, but the Future Sight Stun or the Future Sight Pull, and then Mewtwo Y's like, I don't know, it's autos, slowing, and it's just... Dodrio. Dodrio is such a cool Pokemon. It's such a great design, but literally everything that gets released into this game counters this dumb bird. And I love Dodrio so much, but everything that gets released counters Dodrio here. I don't know what you do. Like, what do you do with Dodrio? I think it's probably A+. I can't really move it any lower. I can't really bring it up to S or anything like that. And then we have another weird Pokemon that for the longest time for me has been an S tier choice, but I actually think is kind of running into big meta issues as well, is Zoroark. Zoroark is good at, for a moment, S, and right now I'd say it probably hangs out with Dodrio right here, pushing it into our A+ tier. But honestly, against X, it's so bad. Like, I feel like against Mewtwo Y, it's not great either. But against X, I feel like it's just so bad. It might even be lower than Dodrio currently. It's hard. It might be lower than Dodrio right now. It doesn't play... I feel like it really doesn't play well into some of these bigger meta choices. But if you have a high skill level with Zoroark, you're still doing pretty good. It's just running into those Mewtwo's is an absolute nightmare for this thing. I'm going to keep it A+. I actually think it's probably better than whatever its win rate is right now. But it's just, yeah, it's hard to play into a lot of the meta. Leafeon, I'd also put into our A+ tier here. I think Leafeon's really good. I think the burst damage you get from Leafeon is really, really solid. It's too flimsy to be higher into our S tier, but it has an incredible amount of burst. Like some of the best burst in the game. Solar Blade also is amazing secure, and you get it at level 4. You could play the Razor Leaf too. It's really, really strong. So I think Leafeon's still doing pretty well. In some ways, I actually think Leafeon does better than Dodrio and Zoroark into some of these meta choices, because at least it just has this insane burst. But all three of these Pokemon, when played correctly, have crazy good burst. And then you have Talonflame, that's fine. I think Talon, it might be better than some of the other speedsters right now, just because it can fly and actually get away from a lot of what is happening in the meta. Brave Bird also has pretty good burst right now. The only problem is with Mewtwo X and Y, you just don't want to be near them at all. Even with Y, it's like so unfortunate being near it, but its burst is pretty good. I think because of its maneuverability and because of its invulnerability with fly, it kind of outpaces other speedsters on the list. Speedsters are either feast or famine. Right now with Mewtwo X and Y, everything is essentially in a famine state, and speedsters get countered pretty hard by the Mewtwo Y safeguard meta. It's just so incredibly devastating for speedsters to try to deal with this meta. And there you have it. There's our tier list right now. As I mentioned before, I really hope this is one of our most short-lived metas that we've ever had inside Pokemon Unite. I pray that we have Mewtwo Y buffs this week. I have a video on my channel to the developers talking about how they really missed the mark with Mewtwo Y and Mewtwo X. I think they really did. These Pokemon are too strong for how easy it is to be good with them. There is our tier list. And now, for fun, this. Basically, if you're not playing Mewtwo Y, you're throwing the game, which is why Mewtwo X is all the way down in our Decidueye Memorial tier. You've seen its win rate. This Pokemon's terrible. It's awful. And it's because it has to play into Mewtwo Y, and it's because it got nerfed and now it's just garbage. Don't ever play Mewtwo X. It's the worst thing in the game. And then you have Mewtwo Y, of course, sitting in our God tier, but you have these Pokemon that counter it. Wigglytuff, hard counter for Mewtwo Y. Venusaur, the beams, hard counter for Mewtwo Y. And then Glaceon can play at bigger range than Mewtwo Y, and all of its moves are sure hits. That's why you see these Pokemon so high on our tier list. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I love you all so much, and I will see you all next time. We did it.